Welcome to Capturing Christianity. I am Cameron Bertuzzi. Today I'm interviewing Father John Farao. I'm actually going to be bringing him on in a second to make sure that I've said his name correctly, but he is a Catholic priest and exorcist, and he's also very involved in prison ministry. We're going to be discussing with him today his personal encounters with the demonic, things that he's seen personally, and we're also going to be discussing the topic of woundedness and sort of one of the things that you and I were talking about, Father Farao, last night is that there's typically, when it comes to these sort of demonic cases or exorcisms, there's usually some sort of entry point, and usually that involves some type of wound. And I think that's really important, and I want to definitely get to discussing that. But first, since this is your first time on Capturing Christianity, I'd love to be able to give you an opportunity, just a couple minutes, to introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll cover any sort of disclaimers that we need to before we begin the show today. So, Father Farao, thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure.
It is my pleasure to be with you.
So inform
And
the audience, just spend about 60 seconds, a minute or two, and just let everyone know what who you are.
I am a conventual Franciscan priest, been ordained 36 years coming up here, and I have been working in a prison environment for 17 years, starting my 18th year. And I have been exorcist for diocese for about 15 years now. So I have been busy with healing and deliverance, with helping people undo the bounds, the involvement they have gotten themselves in through sin, through evil, through the lies of the evil one.
I'd like to take this opportunity before we get into discussing more details about your story and some of the things that you've witnessed and seen. I'd like to make a quick disclaimer that Father Farao, if you guys are interested, and this often happens when I have a guest on my shows, that people will be very interested in contacting my guests. But I would recommend, please don't do that in this case. Father Farao's plate is already full. If you think that you might be dealing with some sort of if it's possible, you think it's possible that you're dealing with some sort of supernatural dark force or anything, please just contact your local priest. Don't try to reach out to Father Farao. There are other things in place those are the proper channels to go through. So contact your local priest first before trying to contact Father Farao. But Father, let's get into, if you don't mind, just tell me a little bit more about your background with respect to exorcisms. We're going to also discuss your experience in prison ministry, which I actually have a personal connection to that. My dad, I grew up Protestant. My dad, I think he still does work in prison ministry as a Protestant, and so I have a sort of personal connection there. I have a lot of respect for people who engage and do that kind of thing, just because it is very difficult. And the type of work that you do is also very needed. So I definitely very much appreciate and respect and honor what you do there. But let's dive in a little bit, because last night you and I were actually doing a test to make sure that all of our technology worked and everything. And I learned that you're actually acquaintances, at least, with Dr. Richard Gallagher, who I've had on my show previously. And you guys even met, I think, was it in Rome at a conference?
Early on, you try and do as much training as you can. And I was invited to the International Exorcist Conference in Rome, um, held like every other year. And so I went. I think I was one of five, six speaking exorcists. There was one from Ireland, another one from America, one from the Philippines. It was a small group. It's only about five. And at that time, Father Gallagher was on the board for the International Exorcists Association. So when we broke down into language groups, he was in our language group. And so I met him 15 years ago. He had many years of experience in consulting with exorcists and seeing clientele and referring people. So I had met him then. I read his book, and I think 2 years ago he forwarded a case to me because somebody moved from the East Coast to where I was, and I told him I'd do my best to follow up with him. So, yes, I know Dr. Gallagher a little bit.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I've had him on the channel as well. So if you guys are interested, you can go check out those previous interviews that we've done with him. But one of the questions that I've had, because you've been to these conferences, you did some of this training with the other exorcists that you've spoken with. Do you guys typically share stories or share experiences that you've had when you all get together? What does it sort of look like when you guys are all uh, sort of hanging out with each other?
We usually talk about situations that I'm saying are new but different. There are classical cases that you're kind of trained about. There are scriptural passages of Jesus casting out demons in the New Testament. And every once in a while, someone will talk about, well, I encountered this, this, this. Had you ever seen this involved in this? And so we'll discuss that. We end up with stuff that we haven't seen from the Caribbean, a lot of voodoo stuff or stuff from Africa or other parts of the world because people travel so much now. You can be working with someone whose family background is from another part of the world. And there may be occult practices there that I'm not familiar with, or someone in the US is not familiar with. So sometimes we'll ask them, well, what do you know about this type of witchcraft, this type of occult activity? And so we will discuss things like that and kind of put together, well, who knows about African stuff? Who knows about Caribbean stuff? Who knows about Central American witchcraft, occult activity? Where would you go to consult on a case regarding that?
I just wanted to highlight that I am getting a note from someone in the comments that the audio seems to be a little bit louder on my side. So I'm going to try to adjust my microphone so that we are roughly around the same audio level. So let me know after I make this adjustment, which I just did. Let me know if on your end we sound roughly the same. So you share some stories with each other. And when it comes to Dr. Gallagher's story and his being a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist and becoming convinced basically of the demonic through his experiences, do you find that that's also a sort of similar story that you encounter among other exorcists in the field? Well, maybe I can put it this way. Have you encountered any other exorcists that were maybe skeptical of the phenomena prior to them becoming an exorcist, and then as a result of being engaged in the discipline, they became thoroughly convinced that this phenomena is a real phenomena and needs to be taken very seriously? And there's frankly not enough exorcists that are doing good work in this area.
There's been a great lack of education on this in seminaries for the last 30, 40 years. And so a number of priests are ordained and really never have a class in this, never really have a class in if somebody comes to you and believes they've been cursed, or family member has been involved in the occult, or has some concerns that there's some oppression in their life. The average priest would say, well, I don't know anything about that. I wasn't trained about that. And usually are not all that excited to go learn about that. That's part of the great deficit that there is. Bishops tend to be looking for men to appoint as exorcists, but that's not exactly a position that everybody raises their hands and is interested to do that. And so sometimes it may take Bishop a while to find someone that he feels comfortable and confident in them. Last thing Bishop wants is somebody to be on the evening news for doing something kind of weird that's got the attention of the press. So it's a ministry that takes a bit of training and a lot of prudence to be careful. You know, there's a lot of mental illness that if you're not careful, people can think that that's demonic in nature, and it really needs to be referred to people who specialize in mental health issues.
What would you say if you could put a percentage on it? And I know this might be difficult to do, but if you were able to put a percentage on the total number of people that you have personally diagnosed as, demon possessed, what percentage of those folks that come to you for help are actually dealing with some sort of mental illness versus people that you suspect are actually demon possessed?
Well, one of the men that I know that does exorcism work full time says that if he sees a true possession case, 1 out of 100 of the different cases that come to him, that's what he thinks. How much of that 99 is mental health? I don't know. It's not impossible to have mental health issues and to have spiritual issues at the same time. Yeah, you can have that. Um, I've had some people in psychiatric hospitals come to me as chaplains and have seen things and have been very curious about how much of their patients or things in psychiatric places have a spiritual component to them, where nurses actually see things in the corridors and stuff. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't know how you could quantify that, but when you're looking at people who are deeply broken and evil is messing with them, that they have uh, deep psychological ones, not all that unusual.
So my next question is going to lead toward uh, asking you about some of your personal experiences with the demonic, and the reason why we do this and cover this topic on this channel, just to let you guys know, is this is primarily an apologetics channel. And what that means is that we are looking at arguments for and against the existence of God. We're trying to provide reasons to think that God exists, that Christianity is true, and then we're also taking a look at the arguments against God's existence, like the problem of evil, and we're offering responses to those sorts of arguments. And so the way that exorcisms and this entire phenomena fits into apologetics is that the evidence of the supernatural might actually be evidence of God's existence, and even Christianity in particular, because if these are true, if doing the rite of 1614, or even the updated rite of, what was it, 1999, if these rites have some sort of impact and effect in the supernatural realm, that seems pretty expected. If Christianity is true, if Christianity is not true, it seems kind of strange that that would have any impact. And so I think that these exorcisms do actually serve as a source of evidence for the truth of God's existence and of Christianity. That's one of the reasons why I personally am interested in these accounts, and I think that a lot of you watching are interested in these accounts as well. But some people don't really have that. That's not why everyone is tuning into this content right now. Some people are just sort of fascinated with the supernatural, and they want to hear the crazy, weird, scary stories. Let's talk about that for a second before we actually get into your experiences, your personal experiences, and some of the things that you've seen. Why do you think that people have this sort of fascination with these dark, demonic aspects of reality? Why are people so fascinated by that?
That's a really good question. Why people go to scary movies, I don't understand that. They pay money to get scared. That's like one of the last things I think of doing that. I get more than enough deeply troubling, sad information where I work in prison, so that I would be looking for scary stuff is kind of like, yeah, like the last thing on my interest level. That really kind of fascinates me. There's a lot of it on TV. Um, I don't know if they're just trying to figure out Well, what is there that I cannot see, that I do not know? I know that my involvement with healing and deliverance and exorcism over and over reminds me and proves to me personally that what the church has taught is true. Using holy water, using blessed religious metals, the power of the scriptures, um, just over and over again has proven to be true and to have an impact in people's lives.
Let's now
A
talk
friend of
about
mine,
some.
yeah, a friend of mine
Go
who
ahead.
recently died was a Eucharistic minister, and he used to go down to a hospital in his neighborhood and take communion there regularly. And one day he called me and he said that he had a young man in the hospital who wasn't Catholic, who was dying. I think he drank too much and did a lot of drugs. He was in his mid 20s, and he was going there and praying with them. And he said this guy had been into a lot of dark stuff. And so one day when he was at the hospital and the whole family all showed up, and he had prayed with this young man a couple of times, and he just turned to the young man and the family and said, well, why don't I read some passages of the scriptures for us? It's kind of appropriate time. And he said that, and one of the family members just piped up really strongly and said, don't read that book, not that book. And the young man looked at him, and my friend looked at the family, and everybody else was really quiet. But there was certainly something about reading from the Bible that made this man very uncomfortable.
Do you think that that could be explained by some sort of, I mean, maybe not even mental illness? It could be some sort of psychological, maybe hurt that he experienced when he was younger with respect to like
Could be,
the Bible or
could be,
Christian
but
church or.
usually people don't react with a lot of intensity. They'll say, "Well, I don't believe that. That book doesn't mean anything
Mhm.
to me." But to be kind of insistent not to use that book, that is a bit odd, at
Mhm.
least.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's probably true. I mean, I know people personally who are not Christians or theists, and typically, if they were to hear some Bible verse read, or if they were here to hear someone offer a prayer or something, they wouldn't want to immediately speak up and stop it from happening. So I think that that is interesting. Some of the stories actually, let's get into some of these more poignant stories that you've personally experienced yourself. So you were even telling me some of them last night, and I was like, please make sure that you save this content actually for the interview tomorrow, just because I think that this is, I mean, again, from an apologetics perspective, this stuff is, I think it's on par with miracles, in support of the existence of God and everything. And so, from that perspective, what are some of the things that you've seen that just defy natural explanation?
There was a case when I was meeting with this couple, and I usually meet in this little church nearby because most Catholic churches are pretty busy and scheduled all types of days. And so we were meeting there with some of the people that part of my team, and I was running a little late. And so they happened to be right behind me, even though I didn't know it. We had not met, they didn't know what my car was. And the wife was hearing from the husband, that's Father John right in front of us. And she said, what, how do you know this? Because I don't know, but that is Father John in the car right in front of us. And I pulled into the church and I got out and they got out right behind me. And um, she was saying, yeah, he was saying last few blocks that it was you in the car in front of us and that she knew that for sure. And also had occasion when I had to prepared a room. We usually meet in a church, but sometimes church is scheduled for other things, so we have to use a classroom. And I set up a catechism room with everything we were going to need for the prayer session. And I had brought in the holy oils, the oil of anointing, the oil of catechumen, the oil sacred chrism, and I'd put it on a table in the corner. And there was some cloths around it. There were some books. There was some other things there. And they came in and sat down, and I started addressing the person who had demonic affliction about the evening, and they just looked at me and they just said in a very clear voice, "Why did you bring the weapons?" And I said to them, "Excuse me." And then they pointed to the specific corner where the holy oils were. That was the only thing that I brought that time that I hadn't brought before. But they were very aware of the presence of the holy oils, and they were bothered by them being there. And it was fascinating to me that they referred to them as the weapons. And when I picked up the oil of anointing to use on the person, they were deeply afraid of it and didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Last night, I think you also mentioned, with respect to this second case, is that no one else in the room even noticed that those were in the corner of the room, whereas this person
Oh, yeah.
knew that they were there and then referred to them as weapons.
And knew what they were. Yes. Everybody else, there were other things in the catechism room, and but actually the person kept staring at that corner throughout the session because those were there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Having
with respect
encounter
to,
one time, excuse me.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
I had an encounter one time. It was kind of a class for exorcists and exorcist assistants. And there was this older priest. Oh, he'd been priest a little while, probably 40 years. And he was praying over a person. He was actually the assistant to the exorcist. The exorcist was half his age. And he was reporting that one day he was praying over this person, and all of a sudden, as he was praying over the person, their eyes just got very wide, and he could tell they were experiencing something. And so at the end of the prayer session, he said to them, "So what happened to you when I prayed over you? I could see a reaction in your face." And she just got very teary eyed and said, "I could see the wounds of Jesus in your hands, and I could see the face of Jesus in your face." And as he told the story, he was in tears. It was like, we're taught persona Christi, that we do this in the person of Jesus Christ. We act as priests in his place, but truly believing that deep in his heart, he said that experience of what she saw and how she spoke to him about that and the look in her face just made it very real and very true for him.
I want to go back to that first case, the case that you explained in the car, where you were driving in front of them. Is that correct? And then the
Yeah,
man determined
we
that.
were meeting up. They didn't even know that I'd be on the road at the same time that they would be on the road.
Okay, so you were just gonna be there at around the same time. Could it have been just like a lucky guess that the guy just sort of guessed that was you in front of him?
That is a possible explanation. From the spouse, though, his insistency that it was me and that they knew it was me, he knew it was me, that was very fascinating. It wasn't the only time where this person had some kind of unknown knowledge about things. That it's kind of like, okay, there's no way humanly you would know about this. And it's kind of like interesting. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason to believe, okay, something supernatural is at place here because I've never told them this, and how would they know this?
Would you be able to share that other instance that you're referring to, or is
I'm
it
trying to remember. I'm trying to remember. Made some kind of comment either about my education or where I had been that I thought was not something that we share with people who come. And
Mhm.
even my prayer team that's with me, I don't think would have known that. So it was just kind of another piece to the okay, this is not just a psychiatric situation. This is not just a clever person trying to pull some kind of ruse over us.
Hmm. Would you mind also explaining some of the steps that you go through? I mean, according to the Rite of 1614, and again, the one that's been updated, which as I
Well,
understand it, you guys can. Oh, go ahead.
uh, I've really been trained under the current rite. My Latin is not really existent. And so that is the rite that the bishops of the US has authorized to be used. And so people come to me, the diocesan policy, and most diocesan policies, the person's supposed to go to their priest, their pastor. Pastor's supposed to interview them, spend time with them, sort out, do they really believe that there is a supernatural thing going on with them? Or is it really mental health and we need to refer them to a good counselor, to a good therapist? So that is the beginning part of it. After the priest has made an assessment and really believes that, yeah, there's something supernatural, then they're supposed to refer that to the diocese. Then the diocese decides who will take care of this case, who has experience. Are they going to ask some other exorcist from somewhere else to help with this, depending on the location? Sometimes you end up with a situation that borders another diocese, and it might be helpful if the other diocese, because their exorcist is closer geographically than their own exorcist. So then we make an appointment with them. There's usually a team of 5 or 6 people. I've been very fortunate to have a couple of psychologists on my team. And so ahead of time, I send them a very long, lengthy questionnaire, a lot of spiritual questions about their upbringing, about things that have happened to them that make them believe that there's something supernatural going on in them, something spiritual going on with them. And after they've completed that, sent that back to me, I read through it to make sure it's kind of clear and that I understand what they're saying. And then we make an appointment for them and usually a family member, a spouse, to come with them to a church where we meet. And we spend a couple hours going through their explanation of what's happened to them, and also that somebody else confirms that they have seen or witnessed these things, and it's not just one person's imagination, but there's also other people um, who can witness to the truth of these things.
In these cases that you've described, in each of these cases, you had them examined by these other individuals, psychologists, psychiatrists, that
They're
you
present
ruled out.
usually before they come to us. If they have been ill a while, they have gone through a number of different physicians and counselors. So usually I have them send me a copy of the evaluation from their medical provider, their physician, or from the counselor that they have seen.
I see. So some of them have already gone through this, and you just
Oh,
obtain those
yeah,
records from them.
right. And you can't really present a case to the bishop to ask for the rite of exorcism without having a clearance from uh, medical person that there's no medical reasons
Mhm.
for this to explain this, and that there's no psychiatric reasons present here that would explain this. So you have to rule out those things before you can even begin to say, well, I believe there's a supernatural reason, a spiritual reason for what's going on.
Well, tell me, we actually have received a super chat. We'll get to that in a second. A super chat for you, Father Farao, if you don't know, is when someone sends money to the ministry, and then they are able to ask a question. And so we'll get to that in just a second. But I wanted to return to this first case that you mentioned in the car. What was the end result of that case? I anticipate that you
That
performed.
case went on for quite a long time. It is not completely resolved yet, but we met with that person for like 3, 4 years regularly, praying over them. It was a very um, deeply sad um, situation of evil being invited into a child's life from the earliest dates of that person's life by people around them that they trusted.
So the knowledge, that's one of the things that when I've spoken with other exorcists, that's one of the sort of signs that you look for when you're trying to determine whether or not
Mhm.
someone is suffering some mental illness versus some sort of demonic possession. Hidden knowledge is one of the things, but also an aversion to the holy. Did you also see in this man's case an aversion to the holy? Because you mentioned an aversion to the holy with the one who said, "Why did you bring the weapons?" Which as I understand it is a separate case. But in this case with the man in the car situation, did he also express a sort of aversion to the holy?
They all, my experience, they all do to some degree. Some much greater than others, but they all do.
Okay. Let's move to the super chat that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And this one is along the lines of maybe a question that I've already asked, and we'll probably answer a little bit more as we go throughout the interview. For all those who don't believe, sorry, this is actually a different one, but we'll get to this one first. For all those who don't believe our Virgin Mother, can you ask the Father about her efficacy in the power over the demonic?
In the book of Revelations, there's a woman who crushes the head of the serpent. The church has always interpreted that as Mary. Mary is incredibly powerful advocate. We always recommend that people who are we're praying with them to have a devotion to Mary, to say the rosary, to beg her intercession. Many exorcists have documented that cases really resolved when the oppressed person in the middle of a session felt the presence of Mary, and that the tide of the whole struggle changed radically, and they were released from their bondage shortly after the possessed person really feeling Mary's presence in the session. So, of all the different angels and saints, Mary's by far the fiercest advocate for God's children, and to have a devotion to her, very powerful. And
All right.
sometimes
The
good, what we do is get people back to their Catholic practice of their faith, back to Mass, back to prayer, back to confession. Most of them have wandered away from that, and they do not realize the power and the efficacy of living the normal Christian life well, and the power that comes in that.
All right. The question that I was referring to at the beginning of this super chat session was from Truth Seeker. He says, "How do you tell the difference between someone who has genuinely possessed and someone who is suffering from a placebo-like effect that is causing them to act possessed and believe they are possessed?
There's all kinds of little tests we do with people that they would not know the difference between a blessed metal and a non-blessed metal, between holy water and just regular tap water. And to differentiate people who, yeah, may come and may pretend or may have a psychological ailment. So I don't want to give all my tricks of my trade away, but often if we're having a long session of questions, of them telling us their history, and it goes on for an hour or two, I'll just hand them a glass of water to drink. So while you're tired, you're thirsty, here's a glass of water. Sometimes it's just a glass of water. Sometimes it's holy water. Demons know the difference and don't exactly swallow holy water very well. Or you hand them something to hold, and it's actually some relic, some blessed metal that they're not familiar with. Yeah, people will have a reaction to that quite a bit. So we do different things to make sure that we believe. One of the things that happens after we have a 2, 3 hour meeting with them and we pray with them, after they leave the room, we evaluate what we saw. And I turn usually first to the psychologist and I say, okay, can you explain all that from a psychiatric point of view? From all the different uh, evaluation tools and all the different things you've read about, is that, mental illness? Is that something that you cannot explain?
And then in those cases, they've just told you, I that's not what I can explain.
They'd say, yeah, the psychiatric literature can't explain something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a case. One of the first cases I helped in another diocese was a young man in his early 20s who was paralyzed from his waist down. His parents had been coming to Catholic churches for years, knocking on the door, asking for help. The priest said, I don't know anything about this. I don't do this. Go see somebody else. Finally, there was a change of pastors in their parish, and they went knocking on the door and telling him that their son was suffering and couldn't walk and was in a wheelchair, and that they would drive him in the car on the church property and park as close to the church that they could at night when he was going through bad experiences. And so this young priest went over to the house with his little bottle of holy water and his rosary and a prayer book, and he started praying over this man in his bedroom, and he started manifesting, making all kinds of noises and not exactly responding in the way that a person would expect. So the next day he called the diocese and he told them what had happened and that he didn't know what to do next, but that these people needed help. So they contacted us and we went out, met with them a couple of times, and he had been physically evaluated a number of times. None of the physicians could explain his paralysis of his legs and why he couldn't stand and why he was in a wheelchair. He had been seen by a couple of different psychiatrists. One was Jewish, actually, who ended up coming to one of the prayer sessions. So his brothers, when he would have a bad manifestation would start bouncing and sometimes fall out of his chair and bang his head on the floor, and his brothers would caress him and hold him, keep him from hurting himself. So I think we saw him 4 times. In the third time we prayed with him, all of a sudden he let out this huge scream and became very quiet, very calm. And all of a sudden, sat up, stood up, and sat in the chair. His brothers were stunned. His mom and dad were in the church praying. We were meeting in the parish hall, I believe. Mom and dad came into the room and he stood up and they just started crying. I don't know if it'd been 4 or 5 years that he had been in a wheelchair. There were two psychiatrists in the room. One was Jewish and said, yes, you don't see this in mental health. He goes, you see slow change. You don't see rapid, amazing transformation. And that was a powerful experience to be in the room for that.
This was not at your parish, correct? This was at another one that you were helping.
This was at a diocese that asked me to come in. They didn't have an exorcist at the time, and at the time the bishop had passed away. They were in between bishops. Nobody in the diocese can appoint an exorcist but a bishop. So they had to wait, but they had a number of cases that were kind of on standby until they got a new bishop who could name somebody and have them trained. And I happened to know somebody in the diocese, and they said, would you help? Would you look into these? Would you be of whatever help you can be? And I said, yeah. So I would go over like once a month. It was a couple hours drive, and I would assist them with cases that already have been screened medically by very devout Catholic psychiatrists and presented them with the help of the assistant pastor that, yeah, this was a case that really needed to be looked at.
I've got a question that has been that has occurred to me recently. Is that when it comes to exorcists? I mean, you all are you see things, you witness things that most people do not, and over that period, I assume that over a length of time, you see enough of this strange phenomena, put it that way, that you might begin to think that it's not as weird or strange as you might think. So the question is, does that ever impact, for example, when a new patient comes along and says, hey, I think I might be possessed. And you're like, well, I've seen this enough times to where I can just kind of spend, 5 minutes with this person and have a really good idea of whether or not they're possessed. Do you ever feel the inclination to just do a sort of ritual with them right there? Or do you still find yourself saying, no, even though I think this person actually is dealing with something, I need to slow down, go through the correct process? Do you ever feel the
Part
sense
of the
of
process, part of the process, there are prayers you can use to help diagnose, because they'll react to these prayers. If there's truly evil present, they normally will react to those prayers. I guess the saddest thing for me is people come to me spiritually who've knocked on many doors, and most people do not believe them, but they feel the presence in themselves. And so when we sit down and we go through the questionnaire and we make sure we understand exactly what they said has happened to them, and usually in the very first few minutes, they will say something like, "You won't believe this. Nobody believes this." And I kind of grin a little bit and I just look at them and I say, "You'd be surprised what I believe." And the group that is with me, the prayer team, usually gets very quiet and listens to them very carefully. And the people are shocked that we take the time to listen, to ask questions about where, when, who else saw this, so that they get a really good hearing. And they're kind of shocked that they're not dismissed right away and, well, this has to be something else. You're just like, no, let's look at this. Because if it's not our area, we still want to refer you to help. Somebody comes to us because they are suffering.
Mhm.
Some of them are deeply suffering. I might not be exactly what they need, but that doesn't mean I just turn them away and say, well, sorry, I don't help you. And I have no advice. I have no physician to recommend them to, no therapist, nothing else. They've usually come a couple hour drive to see me. I owe them a really good hearing and a really good critique of what they tell us. But okay, so what in that do I believe is spiritual? What in that could be mental health? What in that just seems rather odd to me?
I'd like to return to the case that you were just mentioning about the paralysis case. I've been thinking more about that as we've over the last few minutes or so, and it strongly resembles some of the miracle cases that I've heard of, where someone hears someone is praying for someone else, and then all of a sudden they find themselves healed, feeling better, almost in some cases completely restored. And a lot of times atheists or skeptics will respond to those cases and say, well, it was some sort of coincidence, something psychosomatic happened. Even if they don't have an explanation, they'll just say something natural happened, we just don't know what it was. And I think what's the most difficult thing to explain in these cases is the context and the timing. So usually what happens in these cases that are recorded and people have made notes about them, there's miracle or there's a medical documentation about them. In your case, we've got some eyewitness testimony, someone who was there and saw these things happen. But in a lot of these cases, you've got the surrounding context makes things very, very interesting, and the timing of it also makes it very interesting. Why is it that in the case that you described, this person during the prayers, that's when things turned around for him? That's when he let out this, you said like a scream or a loud noise, and then he just stood up and was fine. Why is it in this moment, in this context, that's when it occurred? It could have occurred at any time if it was some sort of psychosomatic
Mm-hmm.
explanation or whatever. But the fact that it happens in this context makes it to where the coincidence explanation seems a little bit less likely. And then what you got to do is consider that this is not the only time something like this has happened. So what an atheist or a skeptic has got to do, and I'm kind of pulling this back to the overall topic of the channel is from this apologetics perspective, do we have evidence for God's existence? Do these experiences and cases, we're almost turning the script on what the devil's attempting to do by hurting people. These are actually these experiences, I think, can actually help people see that God exists and Christianity is true. But once we start to sort of add the cases together, you've got this miracle, this miracle, this miracle, this exorcism where something happened. Once you start to combine things, the coincidence explanation or the unknown natural explanation is just going to I think dwindle in probability. And so feel free to comment on that if you'd like.
If you watch carefully in the scriptures, the miracles that Jesus does, people who have faith see the miracles. If you don't have faith, the miracle's right in front of you, but you don't see it. It's like anybody who's been a dad or a mom and they place the newborn child in your hands for the first time, there's no doubt in your mind the amazing miracle that is. Some people say, oh, it's just another kid, it's just life, it's just natural, reproductive cycle. No, you hold an infant for the first time in your house, and you know how profound a miracle that is. It takes faith to see the miracles. People think that miracles will make people come to faith. There's a number of instances where Jesus heals people, and right after he heals people, the Pharisees will say, show us a sign, basically a miracle that what you did comes from God. Well, what did you just see? What did you just see? Yeah, you don't want to believe. It takes faith to see miracles. I wish it worked the other way around, but uh, it's too easy to say anything. Well, that's just what it is. No, it takes faith to pick up a child. No, yeah, this is not just a reproductive cycle. This is God at work in our lives. We're part of, you know, creating new life that God gives man and woman uh, a part in that.
What I almost hear you saying is that, I mean, some people come to these conversations about evidence for and against. Well, I mean, we're here obviously talking about the in the context of God's existence, but some people come to this conversation without a willingness to be open to being wrong about things. So they may come to the conversation completely convinced that no matter what they hear today, whatever they hear on the show, they're not going to be convinced that anything supernatural is going on. And that's would you say that that's a fair representation of kind of what you're getting at
Our,
here?
our society believes that science can explain everything. When many scientists will say, yeah, there's a lot of things we cannot explain with what we understand. All right. Is it to be boastful? Is it to be prideful? It's just like, yeah, we don't have all the pieces to understand everything the way we'd like to. We would like to think that science can explain it all. But there are times when science says, yeah, we can't explain that. Did it happen? Yeah. Do we have an explanation today for how that happened? It may take us years to understand that. The science always have, the answer. Spiritual things are beyond science's ability to control or to do a laboratory experiment to redo it and make it happen again. That's that's the difficulty. There are some things that if science can't measure it, it's not even part of the scientific method. If you can't test it and measure it, and spiritual things don't give themselves to be tested, to be measured.
I would even take that a step further and suggest that there are things within the scientific domain that don't fall under that category of being able to test. So like the a lot of the cosmological theories, for example, about the beginning of the universe or what the universe is ultimately like at the cosmological level, a lot of those theories can't be strictly tested in the sense of like running some sort of experiment on it. You've got to run these almost philosophical arguments and try to see what the world would be like under these different conditions. So I think scientists, at least at the cosmological level, are actually engaged in this sort of philosophical argument, which is sort of what we're doing here. Is we're looking at different, or we're taking into consideration certain things that we're hearing, and then we're looking for what's a good explanation of this. And in the case of someone just randomly becoming able to walk again, that seems to defy natural explanation.
Well, let me give
There's
you one on the opposite spectrum. I had a young girl call me. She was like 12. She was late in making her first communion. And every time she was going to go to her first confession, she would forget everything. Odd. Okay, but maybe just nervous. So she wanted to come see me with her mother from another country. So I speak English, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian's a little bit of a stretch. So we're sitting there, and this young girl, and mom is listening, is telling me that she has these experiences, goes to these houses, and has prayer sessions. And in the middle of these prayer sessions, she faints. Some people would call that being slain in the spirit, where people normally feel this great calmness and just faint and just lay there for a few minutes in a very restful state and just a very peaceful state. The interesting thing about this young girl was that it was not restful, it was not peaceful, it did not leave her tranquil. And mother is telling me, well, she's a very holy girl. But okay, she hasn't made her first communion, she hasn't made her first confession, she's 12 years old. This is not adding up. So I'm sitting in the room. Mom is on the couch with her daughter next to her. And I don't get two lines into the Our Father, and the girl just falls over on the couch like she faints. And I just sit there and go, okay, this is highly unusual to react that quickly to. I didn't even say the whole prayer. And I just sit there, and mom kind of's not all that shocked by it. But well, when she comes to, this young girl now cannot stand, cannot walk. She's paralyzed from the waist down. Hmm. So I help mom pick up the child, put it in the car. She takes it to the emergency room. They run all kinds of tests on her, cannot find anything wrong. She goes home. A few weeks later, they call me up, want to come back over again, this time with family member. So we're sitting on the couch, and it's the girl, and mom's telling me, well, the emergency room didn't find anything. Hmm, interesting. And the mother had mentioned earlier that when one of the relatives would come visit them, there would be a lot of dissension in the house. The girl was the youngest of five, six. Seemed like there was a lot of fighting, a lot of difficulties getting along when this family member would come to visit. Well, just so happens when they came to see me the second time, the mom, the daughter, this family member was there. And so mom is explaining what happened, the girl's explaining what happened. And I'm taking all this information in. And the visiting family member turns to me and just says, in their native tongue, I'm very powerful, you know. And I said, oh. And I turned to them and I said, so you're a witch doctor. You work for the evil one. He gets quiet. The mother, the daughter just stares at me, and I look at the daughter and I go, so you're doing things that's affecting her. He does not deny it. He does not say anything. And I just turned to the mom and I said, as long as he's doing stuff against her in your family, this is going to be difficult to remove. Mom's face turns white. The relative is um, not in any way embarrassed or saying, I'm sorry, and the girl is just there kind of stunned by this whole conversation. They leave, they never call me again. I'm pretty sure this family member has put a curse on the entire family and this young child, particularly because she hasn't really participated in sacraments, is particularly susceptible.
I'd like to turn now to another super chat that was sent in, and then from here, I'd like to pivot and discuss your experience with prison ministry, because there are some interesting things to cover from that perspective as well. All right, Trippy1V says, "What is the most supernatural thing you've visually seen in or out of an exorcism?" So, for example, he might be thinking of a sort of
Yeah,
levitation
I'm
case,
trying
or
to. I can't not say that I have, had, shall we say, mystical experiences or really bizarre experience. I've seen people react. I had a case where this very large person came to see me, had great anger issues, a
hmm.
demon of anger, rage, had a lot of abuse in their life, and sometimes would fly off the handle and actually grab me. And they weighed like 230 pounds. They're a big person. And so one day when we were starting the prayer session, I had a St. Benedict medal on a chain for them, and I just laid it on their chest. And all of a sudden, it was like somebody just let out a bunch of air out of this person. All of a sudden, all the anger, all the rage that was built up in them. There have been a couple of times with the use of sacramentals, holy water, a crucifix, saw a profound reaction in the person, or could see in their eyes great fear of looking at the cross, wanting to look away from the cross, give them a relic to hold, and they scream like it's burning them.
Let's now talk about the your prison ministry. Tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, you said you've been doing it. What is it? About 18 years?
I started the prison ministry probably a year or two before I was involved in the exorcism stuff.
Okay.
And it was actually the chaplain who had been the prison chaplain before me. He was turning 80 years old and he decided to retire. And I took over for him. And he came to see me one day and he handed me some books on exorcism. And he said, "Well, the diocese really needs an exorcist." And I said, "I have like tons of stuff to do. That's really the bishop's thing." And so I took these books and I started reading them. And it dawned on me, well, if anybody's going to have a lot of issues with supernatural stuff, with evil, I would imagine there's a bunch of these prisoners have been involved in that stuff. And since I hadn't been trained on that yet, I probably wouldn't have recognized it.
Hmm.
I wouldn't know what to go looking for. I wouldn't know the telltale signs. So that's kind of where my education into supernatural stuff and the occult and different things kind of started. And I started paying attention more to things that the inmates would tell me about their involvement into occult, into drugs, into tattoos, into a number of different things that open doorways to allow evil into them.
And so in the prisons, though, I mean, one of the things again that we were discussing last night is that when it comes to someone who might be possessed in the context of an inmate or someone who is in prison, it's not that you can well, at least the state is not going to fund all of these different tests to run on them psychiatrically. I don't know if that's a word.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
And they would, they would have nothing to do with that. So I have to do everything short of asking the bishop is the only one who can authorize the rite of exorcism. The formal church's ritual to cast out evil from someone, the rite of exorcism. Only the bishop can approve an exorcist to do that and to do it for a specific person. Well, getting that approval in prison is not going to happen. And so there's a lot of other prayers, there's a lot of stuff short of the rite of exorcism that a trained person in healing and deliverance can use
hmm,
to determine, okay, is this person uh, telling the truth? Is this a mental health issue? Is this person playing games? I got called one time, my boss called me because he knew I'd gone to Rome to study this, and he was on a conference call with 30 other prisons in the state of California, and they had a prison on a hunger strike, refusing to eat until he had an exorcism. And so my boss told the guy, stay on the line after everybody hangs up. I'll talk to you about that. I think I can help you with that. And so he stayed on the line and he says, my chaplain is an exorcist. And I think I could talk to him and see about sending him to your prison to do an evaluation to get this guy to quit the hunger strike. It just so happened that that other prison was in the diocese where I am appointed an exorcist. So I actually took my documentation, drove 2 hours. I remember it was pouring rain in January to the prison. The warden had an officer waiting for me, took me straight into his office. The warden was a big old 6 foot, 200 some pound guy. He looked at me and I handed him the letter that basically said that I was the appointed exorcist for the Diocese of Monterey. And he goes, I've never seen one of these. And I said, well, these are not all that common, really. And he told me the case, blah, 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 blah. And he's refusing to eat. It's been a few weeks. And we're concerned if things go bad, his family's going to want to sue the state and everything. So can you evaluate him? I go, yes. And I can send you an email telling you exactly what I think. And so they took me to the medical wing where he was refusing to eat. And we sat and talked, and I prayed with him for about an hour and a half. And there was nothing about his reaction to prayers, to holy water, to different things that gave me any indication that this was deeply spiritual other than a mental health issue. And he was pretty mad at me that I wasn't going to do the rite of exorcism on him. And I said, well, first of all, that's not my call. That's the bishop's call. And I will let him know, but I do not see anything here that makes me believe, have founded hope in the truth that this person is being, affected by evil in a negative way. He did not take that all too well, was kind of angry at me. So I left the facility, saw the warden on my way out and said, yes, I saw him. I think this is a mental health issue. I really don't think this is a spiritual issue. I'll be sending you an email. Yeah, that was a very odd, interesting situation where the state of California actually needed an exorcist to make sure that they went beyond um, their responsibilities to help somebody who was demanding something and wouldn't eat otherwise.
that is fascinating. Is prison also the context in the story that you were telling me last night about the person who said uh, there's a lot of things they can do that would shock you or surprise you? What is the
No, that was
context
a
of?
different case. I was praying with someone for some time, and it was pretty obvious that they were possessed by a pretty evil demon who had been part of their life for a long, long time. And in praying over this person, I commanded the demon to tell me what it was trying to do in her life. What was it trying to destroy? What was it about? And the demon said something, and I said in response, "So that's your plan." And the possessed person just looked at me with this very deep stare and said, "You have no idea the depths of my plans." And I remember the way it was said and how that person looked at me. I was looking into the face of evil at that moment. And that's right. I did not understand the depth of their plans for the world, for the destruction of mankind, for the undoing of God's plan. Absolutely. I had no clue the depths of what it had in mind. It was very profound moment at that time.
Was this early on in your career as an exorcist?
I was probably an exorcist, probably 5 years, 5, 6 years before that happens. And it is quite a little educational period. There's I guess it's kind of like the doctors who do residency. You need to see a lot of stuff so that you're familiar with what it looks like when you see it. You
Mm-hmm.
need to know what mumps looks like. You need to know what appendicitis looks like. You need to know
Right.
what blah blah blah, so that when you see it, hmm, so it takes a while to see enough stuff to be comfortable in enough different situations to proceed. And if you need to pick up the phone and call somebody, you know, to say, hey, have you ever encountered this or that? Yeah, it is. It does. I kind of felt like for the first 5 years, yeah, I was just still very much a newbie in all this.
I want to pivot and discuss the last night you were telling me about woundedness and how this is such a central part actually
Oh
of people that are
yes.
experiencing these
We
things.
when exorcists meet and we talk about different cases, the more profound, the more deeply entrenched evil is, almost always there is a deep wound that was an entry point. It's kind of like Eve. Satan tells her, if you eat the apple, you'll be like God. I would imagine walking around the garden, Adam and Eve, with God and seeing all he created and everything he was, just like, yeah, it's pretty neat. It'd be nice to be kind of like that. Hmm. So he's always polishing something, and people have lots of woundedness in life, whether it's people hurting us or people not being there, the absence of good parental involvement growing up that causes people to look for something to fill that wound. Alcohol, drugs, sex, material goods. Yeah, evil loves those wounds as entry points. And the people that I have worked with who have been the most spiritually challenged by evil have had deep wounds. And sometimes it has taken a while to just understand, okay, so how did he get in? And what was the entry point? Because the wounds are painful to talk about. physical wounds, emotional wounds, sexual wounds that some people have had from very early on. And evil exploits those greatly.
And people are looking for I guess some way to soothe it. How does evil then become the way to almost try to fix the trauma or the problem or the wound? How does that work?
Evil tries to give you, shall we say, a false cure. If you drink, this will go away. If you do the drugs, this will go away. But the booze wears off, the drugs wear off. And then you're back at the same place, probably even more upset with yourself that you're looking for love so that you jump into bed with everybody, but nobody do you really give your heart to. I tell
Hmm.
the inmates all the time, I go, I don't understand you guys. Okay. And they laugh at me and I go, you
Hmm.
guys jump in bed with everybody, but 5 minutes after you're done, you're looking to put your pants on and run out the door or get them out of your apartment. I said, the whole idea of love is that you want to stay in bed and figure out, oh, can you come up with some excuse so you can call your boss and say, I'm going to be late today. That's real love. Just having sex, empty sex, that you don't feel good about yourself because you don't even want this person to know the real you, and all you want to do is run out the door. There's no love there. It's hollow, it's pointless. And even the guys in the prison admit that. But they're looking for something, but how they go about it is there's no there. It's very empty.
I think that's actually super profound, not just in cases of these sorts of spiritual issues, but substance abuse issues, addictions, and whatnot. I think that's very very profound. I mean, I know in my own personal life, I've struggled with headaches and migraines in the past, and I still get headaches fairly frequently. But for a period of time, I was medicating them, treating them. You can call it medicating, but I was treating it with alcohol, and so I was drinking daily, and it would help. Like that's the point of these bad things, is that they do kind of help. Like
For a
the
little while,
the
for a little
yeah,
while.
it does help. Like alcohol made it feel better. Like my headaches weren't as bad when I drank, and that was the reason why I started doing that at the degree that I was. And then over time, I just realized the sort of long term damage that stuff can cause, and how it's like putting a band-aid on an open wound that needs a different sort of treatment. It seems like it's the right thing to do. It's a temporary sort of fix. That's kind of how I feel about pharmaceuticals as well. You definitely don't want to rely on them if you don't have to. Some people obviously need them for various
Mhm.
mental health concerns or whatever else. So I'm not saying don't use them, but I think some people are too reliant on them. And but what it comes down to is these things do. If they didn't work at all, we wouldn't be drawn to them at all.
Well,
But they
absolutely.
but they
But
do.
they never reach the root of the problem.
Exactly.
And it's like a placebo. You take it, it feels good for a little while, but is the root wound ever addressed? We were at a chaplains conference that the state requires once a year, usually puts together. There's about 150 chaplains, and they want a psychologist speak to us, and they're talking about inmates and say, the average person in society has about two traumatic events in life. Very common. He said, but most inmates have at least four traumatic events in life. And they've used all kinds of substances and stuff to deal with the traumatic events that haven't worked so well for them. And then they end up in prison. And prison, until recently, hasn't done a lot to work on, yeah, how to help heal the traumatic events. How do we help heal the great woundedness in them? I spend a lot of time with guys coming to talk to me about their lives because they know it's a mess. And it's very interesting. They're very willing, kind of to my surprise, to dig into, okay, so where were you wounded? Where were you deeply hurt? Growing up, neglected, what? That made booze seem like the solution, or drugs, or sleeping around, or gang involvement to fill in for a family that wasn't there, for love that wasn't there, for pain from being physically beaten to a pulp or sexually abused badly. And yeah, what have you done with all those wounds all these years? And
Yeah, and I
most of
think
them just, for a lot of men, they just want to say, well, I kind of figure I'd take it to the grave. And I go, well, that's not working so well, is it? And I've been surprised at their honesty and their directness about it, that someone finally will speak to them about pain that people can accumulate in life, and prisoners accumulate their share. And now in their 40s and 50s, willing to say, everything I tried to do to fix this before hasn't really worked. So I really need to look at something else. And I'm kind of tired of not being able to tell somebody, and kind of sort through all the garbage and all the stuff. And yeah, time to resolve that.
I think honestly one of the biggest vices that leads to this sort of substance abuse and um, just the wrong the wrong medications that people are trying to use to fix their problems. I think sloth might actually be one of the biggest contributors. And feel free to speak to this as well. But some of my reasoning for that is that when you turn to something like alcohol, it's a very easy thing to do. You can just go to your fridge and open up a beer. You can
Mm-hmm.
pour a
Oh,
glass of
sure.
wine, pour a glass of whiskey, and
Mm.
you get alcohol does not take long to hit your system, and it's a very easy thing to do. What's not so easy is to start eating right, is to do some exercise, is to engage in some very very healthy prayer, go to church. Those things are a little bit more difficult. They're going to have they're going to pay much higher dividends, but there's a lot. People I think want instant gratification, and I think again that comes down to slothfulness. But what are your thoughts on that?
Christianity's been doing this a long time, and there is a basic path to holiness, to be close to God, to pray, to go to confession, to receive the sacraments, to live the commandments. That is a very powerful way to keep your whole spiritual well being directed in the right direction. Evil wants to make you believe there's a shortcut to all that. Just drink, just do drugs, just sleep around. Mm. But it doesn't last very long. And then you're back for more. It's amazing that when the people who come to us who are really sincere and really willing to do the work, when we start getting them on a serious prayer regimen, going to church regularly, participating in the sacraments, going to confession, cleaning out lots of stuff that they have been embarrassed to admit. Their life begins to change. Some of them, it scares them because they're so used to the old way that the new way is more than, um, unless they've got good friends, got good support on the side. It's kind of like, well, I don't know that way. That's not comfortable for me.
Mhm.
How sad to be so far from that.
Let's now turn to another super chat that was sent in. Actually, before we do that, let me mention one more time. We mentioned it earlier on in the show. I've seen a couple people mention in the live chat that they'd like to get in contact with Father Farao. Please do not do that. Please do not contact him directly. That is not the point of the show today. Is uh, to bridge the gap between that. If you feel like you're experiencing something, you may not know what it is. You suspect something. In all probability, it's likely some sort of mental illness. In some cases, obviously, there are cases of true demonic possession or oppression or vexation or whatever. But the first step is to contact your local priest. Don't try to contact someone that I interview. Go through the proper channels, and the proper channel is contact your local priest, and then they will point you in the right direction. They can get you all of the help that you need. So please, Father Farao already has plenty on his plate with his prison ministry and other things that he's got going on. So please do the right thing and contact the right people, go through the right channels. So, all right, let's move to super chat from Truth Seeker. He says, if you do blinded tests with holy water and blessed metals, would you be open to a third party monitoring and verifying these claims that demons have aversion to such things?
This is not an experiment. People are suffering. I don't bring people into the room that are not necessary for the prayer session. Nobody that's going through great spiritual turmoil wants to be the subject of a test. I haven't encountered that. Yes, I know science would like to do that, and some people have been a part of that. That's not what I'm about. Okay. I'm trying to help people spiritually the best that I can. There are a lot of different shows that you see. People have all kinds of equipment. They want to study supernatural things. It's not what I'm about. I'm about people who suffer, and I believe prayer and the prayers of the church to drive out evil from them can be very effective in certain situations, and that they come to me for that. Actually, they come to the church, and I'm just uh, one of the vessels that church uses for that. I'll give you an example. All right. I got a telephone at one time at 9 o'clock at night from a gentleman who's in emergency room with his wife, and he thinks she's possessed. And he's trying to tell me that he's going to come right over. And I just stopped him right there. And I said, no, that's not happening. He goes, 9 o'clock at night. And I don't take people, emergency situation, 9 o'clock at night. And by the way, you are like 3 hours away from me. And I'm not going to be up at midnight waiting for you to arrive. And I said, what you need to do is you and your wife need to return to your Christian church and to practice your faith. And after you have done that for a few weeks, then you can get a hold of me and let me know. Does that make a difference? Because if it truly is demonic, um, she's going to have a reaction going back into a church. He goes, well, I'm not Catholic. And I said, well, I didn't say that. Go back to praying, to being close to God, to living a Christian life. Almost anybody who calls me wants to see me right away. One of my first questions is, how long, if you're Catholic, since your last confession? And they get really quiet. And I said, that's one of the best and most important things you can do, is ask God to cleanse you from all the sin and all the ways in which evil has a hold on you. And if you really do have demonic situations, going to confession will certainly be a very good witness to either you have a bad reaction to that, you won't be able to go, or you find it very helpful. When I went to the International Exorcist Conference, the president stopped and looked at the congregation, which were full of exorcists, about 150 of them, said, if people just really returned back to the sacrament of penance, most of our work would be done. Would be done. We wouldn't have to do that. It has been a great lack of using the sacrament of penance that allows evil to do as much damage as he does in a number of people. So first and foremost, I tell people right off, go to confession. Go to confession. Because then call me after that and tell me, how did that go? Were able to go to confession? You couldn't walk into the church. You couldn't sit there. How did that session go with you and the priest? Very, very telling.
I think it really is important. I've heard this from exorcists. I mean, there's a reason why we don't run these sorts of tests or videotape them in the Catholic tradition. There's in the Rite of 1614, there was basically some sort of the rite of exorcism was standardized in 1614, and then there was another rite that was released or created in 1999, I believe, which is the one that you said that you were taught on. And there's a reason why they did that, because there was no sort of standardized process of exorcisms prior to that point. So there were all sorts of different methods that were used, all sorts of different things that were allowed. There's a case that I've been investigating, and I think we're going to actually create a documentary about on a new channel that we're starting soon, on the exorcisms of Nicola Aubry. Let me go ahead and put it up on the screen here if anyone is interested. I'm still researching this case. She was, I think, a young girl, maybe in her teens, in the 1500s. So it was right around the time of the Protestant Reformation. And I think 1565 is when the date of the first exorcism took place, and then 3 months later, exactly 3 months later, was the last one. But this one, very interesting, because there were about, according to people that were close to the event, there were about 150,000 people that came and traveled to witness these exorcisms. There's historians who have commented on it. There's even Protestant historians who were Protestant, then actually saw the power of the Blessed Sacrament. That was one of the things that they used in order to ultimately free this woman. And I mean, there were Protestant exorcists, there were Catholic exorcists, and the Catholic exorcists actually, according to the reports, according to the historical records, they were the ones who actually, or I guess not them, but it was ultimately Jesus. That's what worked on this woman. Is she was actually, there's another parallel between one of the cases that you were discussing earlier and Nicola Aubry of paralysis. So she was what they say unnaturally lethargic. She was just sort of lethargic, laying there, not really doing anything much of the time. They would even try to physicians would come and try to get a sort of response out of her. I think even one of the accounts is that they pricked her tongue to try to wake her up because she was just laying there. And so she was in this sort of like comatose state. And the only thing that worked was when they put the Blessed Sacrament on her lips, and then she would suddenly wake up. And but the reason why I'm mentioning this is because prior to 1614, all sorts of things were allowed. Then after 1614, everything was sort of standardized. So you had to go through this particular standardized procedure if you wanted to engage in the rite of exorcism. And so these sorts of things are not allowed anymore, and there's really good reason. I'm sure Father Farao, you can confirm this and talk more about this, but there's very good reason. You mentioned it's because there's an individual here who is suffering, who shouldn't be put on display. This sort of stuff happened in the past, and there's definitely a lot of things that we can learn from those cases, like in the case of Nicola Aubry. But the priority here is on the person who is suffering. It's not on, whatever evidence you want to find for the existence of God or Christianity. That's not the focus. And I think there's a good reason for that. But I did want to mention that. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that.
No, there's people who come to see me just want to get this behind them and want to move on with their life. And this is a very painful, uh, difficult period of their life that it's not like they want to call me up and reminisce after they're delivered. All right. We might touch base occasionally, but that's something they really kind of want to let go in the rearview mirror and move on and have a normal, healthy life. It's one of the reasons why bishops absolutely forbid them being videoed or anything like that. Just like, no, that just breaks down really fast in a negative way, and you lose sight of, yes, somebody's really suffering here, and the whole family.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to a few more super chats that were sent in. This one is from AB. I bless my house with holy water followed by the St. Michael prayer. How do you suggest I bless it so my blessing is most effective? God bless you both.
And that is more than sufficient. That is what normally would be done. All right. The only time you would do something more than that is that you suspect something is going on there, that somebody had invited evil into your house. Well, if you don't have anything that gives you hints of that, that is a good blessing. I encourage people to bless their houses, to bless places that they stay, even hotel rooms. You never know who was in that before you.
All right, from Pep O'Lean. A friend has voices in his head for years. As we sat outside, I quietly prayed for him. He got very quiet and started having a seizure. Ambulance came, he got checked out, nothing wrong in Monterey, California.
And that's a good thing to tell them. You should really talk to your minister. This is where, you pray with people. Does that have an effect? Does it have a helpful effect? Why would it, for any reason, have a negative effect or a seizure? Or is it something that looks like a seizure, but medically someone
Hmm.
could say, no, that's not exactly what a seizure is normally.
Well, Father Farrell, we've been going for almost 2 hours now. I think we're going to start to wrap things up. Is there anything that you would like to leave with the audience before we wrap up?
Evil likes to be God, likes to call all kinds of attention to itself, likes to be the biggest thing in the room. God is the biggest thing in the room. Trust him, have faith in him, stay close to him. I can't remember if it was Saint Teresa or Saint Catherine that said, the devil is like an angry dog chained to a tree. But we go over and pet the dog instead of just letting it be. We go get involved with occult practices, with drugs, with gangs. We place ourselves in his sphere where he can do things in our lives. God keeps him on a fairly tight rope. Otherwise, we would see so much more of this stuff. Stay close to God. Have a strong faith life. pray, be a holy person, go close to God. Most of this you will not encounter in your life. It is not that common. That a good practicing Catholic would know, that sounds like something you really should have talked to a priest about. You really are wandering far away in the wrong way from faith. Yeah. I do this so that the average Catholic who goes to church every Sunday, who's on occasion having a cup of coffee with somebody, and they say something, and you say, that doesn't sound right. You really should go back to church. You really shouldn't be messing with Ouija boards and things of the occult. This is going to cause a lot of pain in your life. Stay away from that. If you follow the basics of a good Christian life, most of the time evil doesn't want to have anything to do with you. He's got a lot of other people easier to find that's already messing with stuff that they shouldn't be messing with.
Well, Father Farao, I really appreciate you taking the time, and as I said, I really do appreciate what you do in the prisons. I think it's very necessary. It seems like a very tough job, to be honest. I mean,
God is
thank you so
kind
much.
and incredibly helpful. He's the one doing all this work. I'm just trying to be a good servant. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, when finally asked, and she avoided the question for a long, long time until finally they asked her. And she said, I'm just a pencil in the hand of God. He writes whatever he wants to write. And I'm not even that good a pencil. I do the best I can at prison, in ministry, with healing and deliverance, with people in need, because God's the one doing the work. And I try and be an obedient servant to him the best that I can. Trust him. Trust him to lead you and guide you. Fear is not a gift of the Holy Spirit. Faith, hope, charity, those are his gifts. Be working out of that in your heart, not out of faith, fear and doubt. And that's all the pieces where evil creeps into us.
Okay, well, once again, thank you so much for coming on, spending time with us, and helping us out. Really do appreciate it. I won't hold you up any longer. I know you've got some important things to get to.
All right. God bless you all, and may his blessing come upon you and remain with you forever. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Have a good day.
You too. All right. We'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?